100 years ago this week, a double murder an hour outside New York City became a front-page sensation, launching the popularity of a new type of newspaper called a tabloid. Filled with intrigue, lies, and an illicit affair, the fascinating story is detailed in a new book called Blood and Ink by Vanity Fair writer Joe Pompeo. We sat down with Pompeo in New Brunswick, New Jersey, at the church where the victims, a reverend and a singer in his choir, met for the first time. A century ago, America was emerging from years of war and pandemic, ready to roar into the 20s.
In the 1920s, I think people were looking for things to obsess over, that were, didn't have to do with the war they'd just come out of, this pandemic that had, the period of the country, it was coming back to life after this really dark time. And I think the Hall Mills story, as well as other sensations of the Roaring '20s and the Jazz Age, people just loved following these things. It was the morning of September 16th, 1922.
In a field near New Brunswick, New Jersey, two locals discovered two bodies, a man and a woman. Both had been shot, left down a secluded road in a very specific way.
The bodies were positioned next to one another in a pose that clearly suggested some sort of intimacy. His arm was outstretched and her head rested on his arm. Her hand had been placed on his thigh. Most telling of all, there was a stack of papers between them. These were love letters.
Love letters documenting the relationship between the victims, both married but not to each other. One a prominent church leader, the Reverend Edward Hall. The other, a choir singer named Eleanor Mills. We're sitting in the place where Edward and Eleanor may have met for the first time.
This is certainly kind of the ground zero of their love affair. And they would, after choir practice, they would sometimes disappear to his study, which is still, there's a room over there, which is his study, and they would leave their love notes in hymnals, or there was a book on his bookshelf. A lot of the intrigue happened in this literally in the very place where we're sitting right now.
The case was full of sex, scandal, and speculation. Was the Reverend's older wife, an heiress worth millions, the one responsible? Was it her oddball brothers? Was it Eleanor Mills' husband, who certainly had his own motive? Or someone else? The story was tailor-made for a whole new brand of journalism.
Newspapers, they've been obsessed with crime and murder going back to the penny press of the Victorian era, and certainly the Hearst and the Pulitzer papers and the Yellow Press at the turn of the century. People followed this stuff, but this was the first time there was a new medium, which is the tabloid press, covering things like this, with photographs.
One tabloid, the up-and-coming New York Daily News, went so far as to try to elicit a confession from Eleanor Mills' husband by staging a seance. As Joe Pompeo writes in his new book, Blood and Ink, the scandalous Jazz Age double murder that hooked America on true crime.
This was the O.J. Simpson case of its day. You had about 300 reporters from all over the country that were, trekking around. All the hotels are booked up. They're renting out houses.
Despite unprecedented attention, the case lingered for years, until it was revived by another tabloid. Police used the media attention, along with the accounts of a mysterious local farmer known as the Pig Woman, to bring the case to trial, charging the wife of the Reverend and her brothers. In perhaps the most dramatic testimony the country had ever seen, the Pig Woman, deathly ill by then, was wheeled into a courtroom on her hospital bed.
But at the very end, she's being wheeled back out, and she raises her voice, and she looks at Francis Hall and points, and she says, "I've told the truth, and you know I've told the truth, so help me God." It's like if this was a movie, you couldn't make that line up.
When the trial was over, Frances Hall and her brothers were acquitted and successfully sued the tabloid. But the story didn't end there, and in fact, never has.
100 years later, will this crime ever be solved?
I don't know what testing you could do at this point to determine anything. There's people who very much want to solve this crime. These sort of amateur detectives and historians. There's a Facebook group where this community of people who are obsessed with this crime. But I think also with stories like this, I think what makes them so powerful is that we don't know. And I think that's, to me, I think that's what gives this story a lot of its power and mystique.
And we want you to solve the case, Jeffrey.
I know. We try. Listen, I was trying to solve the case as I'm reading the book and as I'm walking around New Brunswick there. And everybody does who approaches this story, because it does remain, and it's hard to imagine it ever being solved. But now we could feel free to investigate.
I want to read it.
This was a media circus. It really was.
Before media circus.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the originals.
Yeah.
And the book is a fascinating trip through history.
Yeah,
Put it on my list.
Yeah, sounds like a good one. Thanks, Jeff.